I'm starting on page 140. We're still in chapter 15. Oh, and in case you're interested, Kathy is out of town. She's on her way to Black Mountain with a friend. Said she did. I talked to her on the phone yesterday, said she didn't even take her computer, so she would not be with us today. So Matthew chapter 15, verses 21 through 28. Would anybody be interested in reading that?
Oh, what page?
140.
140. I'll read it as soon as I find it.
Okay.
140. Almost there. 15:21 through 28.
Yes.
And Jesus left there and withdrew to the districts of Tyre and Sidon. And look you, a Canaanite woman from these parts came and cried, have pity upon me, sir, son of David. My daughter is grievously afflicted by a demon. But he answered her not a word. His disciples came and asked him, send her away, for she is shrieking behind us. Jesus answered, I sent her only to the lost sheep of Israel. I was sent only for the lost sheep of Israel. She came and knelt in entreaty before him. Lord, she said, help me. Jesus answered, it is not right to take the children's bread and throw it to the pet dogs. She said, true, Lord, but even the dogs eat of the pieces which fall from their master's table. Then Jesus answered her, woman, great is your faith. Let it be done for you as you wish. And her daughter was restored to health from that hour.
Okay. One comment I want to make before I actually get into what Barclay was saying, he analyzes this to the nth degree, and in my opinion, kind of stretches a point. But anyway, he makes the point that this is the only occasion on which Jesus was ever outside of Jewish territory. And he says that the supreme significance of this is that it foreshadows the going out of the gospel to the whole world. And I remember Cindy preaching a sermon on this passage years ago, and she said that this was also an aha moment for Jesus, that he was being sent to more than just the Jewish people. And so the reason he has left the Jewish territory is that he's looking for time to prepare himself for what's to come, and also to prepare the disciples. And further on in the chapter, Barclay makes the point that Jesus was this trip very possibly took as much as 6 months. So the disciples had a lot of time with Jesus. And he also he would be safe from the hostility of the scribes and the Pharisees, and also from the dangerous popularity of the people, because he knew the Jews were not very likely to follow him into Gentile territory. So she comes to Jesus and she asks him for healing for her daughter, and the disciples are saying, just get rid of her, give her what she wants to get rid of her. Barclay makes the point that they're not being compassionate here; they just want the nuisance gone. And then he talks about how this woman being a Gentile, it was very unusual for a Gentile to have approached Jesus. And it may be an indication of just how famous he was, that she would have heard of him, because the Tyrians would have had the most ill feelings toward the Jews. And he reminds us that somewhere else he said that Jesus had to limit his objectives like a wise general. And this is where Barclay starts really kind of stretching the story out, in my opinion. Barclay says there's only one thing for him to do. He must awaken true faith in the heart of this woman. So he turns to her and talks to her about the dogs. And Barclay says that dogs were considered very unclean, but that the word Jesus uses here is a word for pet dogs, as opposed to the scavenger dogs on the street.
But I was under the impression they did not have pet dogs back then.
I was too, and that's part of my wondering if Barclay's really stretching it here.
What about sheepdogs? Didn't they have sheepdogs?
I don't think so.
I've never seen anything about sheepdogs.
That's
That's why the shepherd was so important, I think, because they didn't have, sheepdogs were, you say sheepdogs, I think about the British Isles.
Yeah, because the sheepdogs are specifically bred for extremely cold regions.
Yeah,
Well, now I know the Romans had dogs because they used them in battle, did they not?
I have no idea.
I'll look that up. Sheepdogs.
But he says that to call a person a dog was a deadly, contemptuous insult. The Jews spoke with arrogant insolence about Gentile dogs, infidel dogs, and later Christian dogs. In those days, dogs were unclean scavengers of the street. But then he says, the way you say something can change the meaning. And so he is making the assumption that Jesus did it with a smile, and that the woman understood it. But he actually shows the Greek and says it's the diminutive word for dogs, which is used. So apparently at least some people did have pet dogs. And it's a very different from the stray dogs. So the woman was a Greek. She was quick. She had the Greeks' ready wit. So she comes back and says, well, at least the pet dogs get to eat the scraps. And he says, and Jesus's eyes lit up with joy at such an indomitable faith, and he granted her the blessing and the healing which she so much desired. I don't know where he's getting that. It makes sense, but the Bible certainly is not saying it. So then he goes and talks about the woman in great detail. First and foremost, she had love for her child, pretty obvious. She had faith. And he says it was a faith which grew in contact with Jesus. She began by calling him Son of David, which was a political title, and ended up by calling him Lord. And it was a faith which worshiped. And thirdly, she had an indomitable persistence. And I think that just comes from being a mother. Your kid's sick, you're going to do whatever it takes. And if being a pain in the butt and being persistent is needed, you're going to do it. And then she had the gift of cheerfulness. She was in the midst of trouble. She was passionately in earnest, and yet she could smile. She had a certain sunny-heartedness about her. I'm not sure where Barclay's getting this.
I think she was humble. She humbled herself and said, "Yeah, but we need some crumbs,
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I agree with you that there were other Gentiles that came to Jesus asking for healing. The centurion. I mean, there were others, and this whole idea that Jesus is all of a sudden going to the Gentiles over and over and over again. He said, "No, I'm here for Israel." Until after the resurrection. And I think it's a huge stretch to take a little here and a little there, and claim that that's the beginning of the Gentile, and the word Lord, that was just simply another word for saying sir. It wasn't a Lord like my man, the Messiah. It was just sir, and so I think Barclay's having a off day here. I love Barclay, but like I've said before, he's not incarnate. know.
Okay, any other comments on this passage before we move on?
I did find something about dogs.
Okay,
This was in an app called Quora, and they said, did ancient Israelites use dogs to shepherd their flocks? And it says, yes, they did sometimes. In Job 30, there is a verse that goes, but now that they are younger than I, have me in derision, those whose father I would have disdained to have set with the dogs of my flock. That would mean that the Israelites did use dogs to shepherd sheep, as Job is saying here, that the people have an even lower rank than his sheepdogs. And then, but then later edit was that Job wasn't an Israelite. However, the book of Job was written by one. That still goes to show that Israelites must have had some familiarity with using dogs to shepherd sheep. I know that a trained sheepdog, though, nowadays is a very expensive commodity. I don't know what it would have been like then. But they are very expensive from what I've learned from some members that are, some people that are, that I know that use sheepdogs.
yeah, I think any dog that's been well trained for a specific task is expensive. Remember when, I remember the dog's name was Chase. I don't remember the blind guy. They came to church for a while.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I frequently gave him a ride because I, at the time, lived very close to where he lived. And he talked to, you know, of course, he didn't have to pay for it. You know, whatever nonprofit trained the dogs also provided them at no cost for people who needed them. But they're also very expensive. Okay, next section, the bread of life. We're still in Matthew 15. This is verses 29 through 39. Is anybody willing to read that section?
I'll read it. What are the verses again?
15, 29 to 39.
Okay. Jesus returned to the Sea of Galilee and climbed a hill and sat down. A vast crowd brought him the lame, blind, crippled, mute, and many others with physical difficulties, and they laid them before Jesus, and he healed them all. The crowd was amazed. Those who hadn't been able to speak were talking, the crippled were made well, the lame were walking around, and those who had been blind could see again, and they praised the God of Israel. Then Jesus called his disciples to him and said, I feel sorry for these people. They have been here with me for 3 days and have nothing left to eat. I don't want to send them away hungry, or they will faint along the road. The disciples replied, and where would we get enough food out here in the wilderness for all of them to eat? Jesus asked, how many loaves of bread do you have? They replied, 7 and a few small fish. So Jesus told all the people to sit down on the ground. Then he took the 7 loaves and the fish, thanked God for them, broke them into pieces, and gave them to the disciples, who distributed the food to the crowd. They all ate until they were full, and when the scraps were picked up, there were 7 large baskets of food left over. There were 4,000 men who were fed that day, in addition to all the women and children. Then Jesus sent the people home, and he got into a boat and crossed over to the region of Magadan.
Okay, I want to share. I practiced this morning with Stuart, so I know I can do this. Okay, can y'all see the map?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so we see Galilee, which is where Jesus spent most of his time. And so he has been in this area here, Tyre and Sidon. And I think this is the passage where it says he leaves Tyre and goes to Sidon on his way back to the Sea of Galilee, which is kind of crazy because here's the Sea of Galilee. So that gives you an idea of how much. Now remember, he's doing this all on foot.
Well, it says In my version, it says, and Jesus left there and went to the Sea of Galilee.
Right. So well, hold on. Let me find what I'm talking about. Yeah. So maybe this is Barclay doing his thing again, because he makes the point that he goes north before he goes south.
Mhm.
And let me just point this out so I don't have to come back here again. If we get there today, we may talk about Caesarea Philippi. So here's where that city is. Again, he's outside of Galilee. And part of what makes this city famous is that it's the source of the Jordan River. So see, you've got something coming down here to lake here, and then Jordan River comes out of that lake. And then we'll talk about the Decapolis, which is a region of 10 Greek cities. So here's the Decapolis. So Jesus really got around a lot in this particular section of scripture. Okay.
That was great. Thank you, Sarah.
You're welcome.
I love being able to see a map and hook it to the scriptures.
Right, because I remember as a kid, anytime I saw the name of a place, it had no meaning because I'd never looked at a map. It's just, okay, there's just another city.
Mhm.
And the maps make a difference. Okay, Barclay talks about using this story to figure out dates and how long Jesus is somewhere. And some people think that this story is just a slightly different version, but it's the same episode of feeding of the 5,000. And Barclay says, no, it can't be, because in the story of the feeding of the 5,000, scriptures talk about how everybody sat down on the grass. And there's only grass in that part of the world in the springtime. That summertime is so hot and dry that the grass dries up. So this one says they sat on the ground. So that tells you the other one was in the spring and this was in the summer. And then, okay, let me read this little part of a paragraph. For the next note of time and place, we go to Mark 7:31. So that's where he gets this, is Mark. Then he returned from the region of Tyre and went by way of Sidon toward the Sea of Galilee. So remember, Sidon was north of Tyre. So Mark is where he gets this. So he goes toward the Sea of Galilee in the region of the Decapolis. So and he says to say that this journey would take about 6 months. Now, this is another situation where there would have been many Gentiles present, perhaps more Gentiles than Jews. Again, who knows where he's getting that. It is that fact that explains the curious phrase in verse 31, they praised the God of Israel. And another thing that comes in here is the form of the basket. The story of the 5,000, they're using a Jewish basket that's like that's a basket, and that this word could translate more into a hamper. So this was a different type of basket. It was big enough to carry a person, and it's also a basket that a Gentile would use. So in this passage, we see fully displayed the graciousness and the sheer kindness of Jesus. We see him curing physical disability, I mean, every type of disability I could think of was listed there. We see him concerned for how tired the people are and that he wants to strengthen them. And again, we see him feeding the hungry. We see here the power and the compassion of God going out to meet many needs of the human situation. Another author, biblical scholar, has pointed out that in 3 successive stages of his ministry, Jesus ended each stage by setting a meal before the people. First, there was the feeding of the 5,000. That came at the end of his ministry in Galilee, because Jesus was never to teach there again. Of course, that assumes that the order of the story written was the order of how Jesus did it, and we have no way of knowing that. Second, there's this feeding of the 4,000, and this is the end of his brief ministry to the Gentiles beyond the bounds of Palestine. And then third and last, there's the Last Supper in Jerusalem, which is the final stage of his earthly life. Jesus always left people with strength for the way, always gathered them to him to feed them with the living bread. So, any comments about this feeding of a bunch more people?
I'm very suspicious that it's a different scenario. And if I said to Claire, sit on the ground, Claire, is that any different than saying sit on the grass, Claire? I mean, really, I agree with what you're saying. Barclay is having a self-imposed intellectual moment here, I think, anyway. I think we would have heard more about a second feeding if in fact that was what was to be conveyed. And, you can wordsmith all you want, I mean, we're hearing a lot of wordsmithing today about, who did what to the virus. It's wordsmithing, and you can play all you want with words, but it doesn't change the story. My opinion on it.
Yeah, I read this particular, I've read about 20 pages here, and my thought was this is the result of a really good creative writing class. That's how it came to me. Okay, so starting chapter 6.
Oh, it confuses me, and I think it makes me want to read more, and especially go back to Mark and read not what Barclay's translation is, but when I read this passage, I don't read him as feeding. I read him as feeding Jewish people, not Gentiles, because he went back to Galilee and went up into a mountain. And the way that he's not anywhere, it sounds like he left the Gentile area and now he's back with the Jewish people again. So here he's fed the Jewish people twice. So
Yeah.
I have to really go back and read more of what that statement from Mark says, and then come back to Matthew and see where was he when it was the second feeding. And it seems like that right now I would misinterpret that Barclay is not in the right place.
Yeah. Moving into chapter 16. This is short, so I'll read this one. This is verses 1 through 4. The Pharisees and the Sadducees came to him, trying to put him to the test, and asked him to show them a sign from heaven. He answered them, "When evening comes to you, say, 'It will be fine weather because the sky is red.' And early in the morning you say, 'It will be stormy today because the sky is red and threatening.' You know how to discern the face of the sky, but you cannot discern the signs of the times. An evil and apostate generation seeks for a sign. No sign will be given to it except the sign of Jonah." And he left them and went away.
See, he's back in Galilee.
Yeah. So then Barclay, and we've talked about this in the past, talks about how it's extraordinary that the Pharisees and the Sadducees had the same goal because they don't agree on anything. but they do agree that they want to get rid of Jesus. So they're asking for a sign, and Jesus basically tells them, no, you don't get a sign. If you can't see what's happening in front of you, you don't get another one. And so Barclay is basically saying that Jesus is saying to them, look, I am the sign. I am the sign that, I am God's message. So you don't need anything else. If men and women cannot see God in Jesus, they cannot see God in anything. I mean, it's like Claire has said in the past, gosh, how wonderful would it be just to be there and actually meet Jesus? How would you not recognize him? But they didn't.
What was the sign of Jonah he referred to?
I think just that, Jonah, I assume that he meant that Jonah was swallowed by the whale and then, survived all the stuff that he survived, because he got on a boat to go in the wrong direction, trying to escape being sent to Nineveh. And there was a huge storm, and Jonah finally said, I'm the reason for the storm, throw me overboard. So they threw him overboard, and the seas calmed, and then Jonah was swallowed by the fish and spent 3 days, and they spit him back out, and he went to Nineveh, and he saved Nineveh.
Mhm.
Yeah, resurrection after 3 days, and then,
Right.
then saved the Gentiles.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So,
Well, he's saying an evil and apostate generation seeks for a sign. The only sign that the evil and apostate generation is going to receive is the sign of Jonah.
Right.
Why do I feel like evil and apostate generation kind of describes the times in which we're living?
I think it describes everyone's time of living.
Yeah.
I don't think we're unusual.
no, we've been watching, Tom's been watching, and I sit in the same room with it. Lots of PBS, BBC shows about World War II, leading up to it, what was going on afterwards. And yeah, that's what it was. I think every age feels like that to some extent.
Did you read the news article about the scuba diver that was swallowed by the whale? And the whale reached and spit him out. And the people on the boat filmed it, so it did happen. But the scientists then came in, and a whale cannot swallow something as big as a human, the way their throat is built to filter the small things that they eat. So when I read that, I was thinking about Jonah, wondering if he got spit out when the whale breached.
Yeah, because I knew that a whale couldn't swallow something as big as a human, so I was wondering about that. So
Yeah.
There are lots of different whales too. There are lots of different kinds of whales. I don't know if all whales can't swallow a human. If they're
Probably
really
so.
whales can't.
Probably not, because they just filter all the small stuff that's in the ocean. They eat small things. I don't know.
Claire, you're on mute. We can't hear you, Claire. Turn on your mic.
That does help.
Yeah.
Well, there are things like killer whales that are technically not whales, but can swallow whole huge dolphins and things like that. So, and then, back in the day, we have to think about how many species and other types of fish there were that we have since happily destroyed. So I don't know.
Megalodon.
Megalodons, yeah.
I think they're a little bit older.
It may just be a story.
Yes, it might. But yeah, I
Sperm whales are the only species with throats large enough to technically swallow a human.
What type of whale?
Sperm whales.
Ah,
Toothed whales
that
have teeth and feed on prey. So a sperm whale can swallow a human.
so that's why you had Moby Dick was written about a sperm whale.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
okay. Thus ends the science lesson for today. Okay, next passage. Can somebody read, we're in chapter 16, verses 5 through 12.
Okay, I'll read it.
Okay,
When the disciples came to the other side, the other side of what?
Sea of Galilee, I think.
Okay. He left, the last passage was, he left them and went away. When the disciples came to the other side, they had forgotten to take loaves with them. Jesus said to them, see that you beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and Sadducees. They argued among themselves. He must be saying this because we did not bring loaves. Jesus knew what they were thinking. Why, he said, are you arguing among yourselves, you of little faith, because you have no loaves? Do you not yet understand? And do you not remember the 5 loaves of the 5,000s and how many baskets you took up? And do you not remember the 7 loaves of the 4,000 and how many hampers you took up? How is it that you do not understand that it is not about loaves that I spoke to you? Beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Then they understood that he did not tell them to beware of the leaven that is in the loaves, but of the teaching of the Pharisees and Sadducees.
And once again, the disciples are being thick-headed. So we know that leaven is what raises bread, but Jesus is talking about the evil. It's a Jewish metaphorical expression for evil influence. Barclay says leaven has the power to permeate any mass of dough into which it is inserted. Therefore, leaven stood for an evil influence liable to spread through life and to corrupt it. And to me, I have trouble going from leavening bread, which is a good thing, to turning it into an evil influence. It's really stretching a point.
No, I can do that in one example. I worked at a place that was by a sewage treatment plant, and one of the stages that the treatment is, it smells exactly like yeast. And now when everybody smells yeast, they go, oh, fresh baked bread. And I go, no, it grosses me out.
Okay. Interesting. Okay, yeah, I'd hate for yeast to lose its association with bread for me. So you're saying you could never work in a bakery, huh?
To this day, I keep in touch with one of the people that I worked with there, and she says that the smell of yeast absolutely grosses her out.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Well, Claire, between the water treatment and the slaughterhouses, you just go to the nicest places.
I do. I mean, I don't like to call myself cheap, but I'm frugal. So yeah, I've definitely seen some non-upscale places.
Okay. So Barclay goes into the differences between the Pharisees and Sadducees. Pharisees saw religion in terms of laws and commandments and rules and regulation. They saw religion in terms of outward ritual and outward purity. No offense, but it reminds me of Southern Baptist. The thou shalt nots. And then the Sadducees were wealthy, aristocratic, and they were deeply involved in politics. So the two groups had totally different Attitudes. Jesus may well have been reminding the disciple that material prosperity is far from being the highest good, and that political action is far from producing the most important results. The true blessings are the blessings of the heart, and the true change is not the change of outward circumstance, but the change of human hearts. In reading that in terms of being rich and having financial security is not what it's all about. One of the things Tom and I did when we were in Harrisonburg, we visited the Mennonite Church of the Brethren historical or heritage site. And I bought a book there, surprise, surprise, that had to do with the doctrines of the Bible in terms of the brethren. And I was just reading the table of contents, and they have a whole chapter on life insurance and how life insurance is contrary to biblical doctrine, because you're supposed to rely completely on God. And if you buy life insurance, it says that you're not relying on God. So they actually have a doctrine against life insurance.
Wait a minute. So if I wear my seatbelt, I'm not relying on God?
Yeah.
I'll be interested to hear when you read that book more, because my mother was raised Brethren. I know nothing about it except they wash their feet. So I'll be interested.
They wash their feet. One thing I learned there was that the Brethren / Mennonite, because they're, two branches of the same tree, they are, during the Civil War, they were the beginnings of the concept of conscientious objector. That, Jefferson Davis probably had to sign something, but they were the first folks to officially be allowed that status and not being forced to go to war. Although some of them, before they came up with the idea, they were imprisoned because they wouldn't fight.
What was the movie? It starred Jimmy Stewart, and it was set in Shenandoah. Was that the name of the movie, Shenandoah? And this was the Civil War, and he didn't go to the Civil War because of his religious beliefs. But that was set in the Shenandoah Valley. Do you remember? Does anybody else
I
remember
know
that?
exactly what you're talking about,
Yeah.
but didn't his sons go to war?
I remember Gary Cooper, the movie Gary Cooper.
Okay, Cooper. Okay, Gary Cooper. I was thinking Jimmy Stewart, but
He wouldn't go to the World War One.
oh no.
His mule got, hit by lightning or something, and he got God, and then wouldn't go because he was conscientious objector, but they made him go anyway.
Now,
Yeah, this
I
was-
remember the movie you're talking about, and it had, I think it was called Shenandoah, and it did have a scene where one of the armies came through and they were grabbing all the livestock, and they tried to get this goose that was a pet goose. And the mother was very calm throughout everything until they grabbed that goose, and then she lost it. She screamed at him and said, "That's a pet."
Right. But what wasn't the movie made in the Shenandoah Valley?
I don't know if it was made there or not, but it certainly, that was the premise, that it took place there.
I just remember Jimmy Stewart plowing.
It's funny, the only one of the few scenes I remember from that one was the daughter had a boyfriend, and he went to Jimmy Stewart and asked for permission to marry his daughter, and Jimmy Stewart said yes, and the young man was so excited that he goes running out of the house and running down the lane and hooping and hollering. He's so excited, and the daughter comes into the living room, and Jimmy Stewart looked at her and said, "Well, he'll be back in a little while to ask you." Okay. Verses 13 through 16. When Jesus had come into the districts of Caesarea Philippi and asked his disciples, now remember, this is on the map, this was in Gentile territory again, "Who do men say that the Son of Man is?" They said, Some say John the Baptist, others Elijah, others Jeremiah, or one of the prophets. He said to them, and you, who do you say that I am? Simon Peter answered, you are the anointed one, the Son of the living God. So once again, in terms of preparing for what's to come, Jesus has withdrawn into to another area, and Caesarea Philippi lies about 25 miles northeast of the Sea of Galilee, and it's outside the domain of Herod Antipas, who was the ruler of Galilee, and was within the area of Philip the Tetrarch. And remember that Philip and Herod Antipas were brothers. The population was mainly non-Jewish, and Jesus could have peace there with the 12. So again, this is Barclay kind of embellishing things. Confronting Jesus at this time was one pressing and demanding problem that would not go away. He wasn't sure if anybody had really gotten his message. And he was concerned that when he died, it would have all been for naught, that there would be no Christianity unless somebody got the message. He gives us a little bit of history, and I thought this was interesting, that this city was the center of a lot of different religions. So you've got temples of the ancient Syrian Baal worship. It is supposedly the birthplace of the great god Pan, who was the god of nature, so much so that the city was called Panias. And it's even, the word Panias is actually in parentheses on my map that I showed you. And then it also was the place where the sources of the Jordan River sprang to life. And there's a great white marble temple built to Caesar. And that's why it's named, the city was named Caesarea Philippi, that Philip enriched the temple and named the city for Caesar and then also for himself. So that's why it's Caesarea Philippi. And that distinguishes it from there's another Caesarea on the coast of the Mediterranean. And still later, Herod Agrippa calls the place Neroneus in honor of his Emperor Nero. So, if you got enough power, you can just change the name of a city any way you want to. Reading from Barclay again. Here indeed is a dramatic picture. Here is a homeless, penniless Galilean carpenter with 12 very ordinary men around him. At the moment, the Orthodox are actually plotting and planning to destroy him as a dangerous heretic. He stands in an area littered with the temples of the Syrian gods, and a place where the ancient Greek gods look down, and a place where the history of Israel crowded in upon people's minds, where the white marble splendor of the home of Caesar worship dominated the landscape and drew the eye. And there, of all places, this amazing carpenter stands and asks his disciples who they believe him to be, and expects the answer, the Son of God. It is as if Jesus deliberately set himself against the background of the world's religion in all their history and all their splendor, and demanded to be compared with them and have the verdict given in his favor. There are a few scenes where Jesus's consciousness of his own divinity shines out with a more dazzling light. Like I said, creative writing.
Well, yeah, I mean, I can't remember too many places in the New Testament where Jesus set out to create a new religion.
Mm-mm.
He came to the Jews for, to bring the Jews back to, where they should be in a relationship with God. He did not come to create a religion. I mean, or I can't find the references to, support that theorem.
But that's what he did.
Well, that's what he did, but that's not, that's what man did.
That's what Paul did.
Hmm?
That's what Paul did.
Paul did more than Jesus for sure. But I mean, Jesus came to the Jews to, repent. And so anyway, that's, and as far as, well, I'll leave it there.
Okay, so Barclay says, notice that Jesus did not ask the question directly. He said, what do other people say? Some say he's John the Baptist, come back. Others say he's Elijah, and others say Jeremiah. And the reason for this is other scriptures. Malachi says, lo, I will send you the prophet Elijah before the great and terrible day of the Lord comes. So that's one reason for thinking. People who thought he might be Jeremiah, and has an interesting history to it. Supposedly, it was believed that before the people went into exile, Jeremiah had taken the ark and the altar of incense out of the temple and hidden them away in a lonely cave on Mount Nebo, and that before the coming of the Messiah, he would return and produce them, and the glory of God would come to the people again. So
I was questioning and wondering, how would people think that he was John the Baptist when they had been contemporaries? Anyone who knew John the Baptist and Jesus had existed, simultaneously, how could he be John the Baptist?
well, because by this time, John the Baptist was dead.
Yeah, but Jesus existed.
John the Baptist baptized Jesus.
Yeah, they didn't hear the story about him baptizing Jesus.
Yeah. Well, their level of scientific knowledge was so microscopic compared to ours. They had lots of superstitions. So maybe they thought, John the Baptist possesses Jesus and in effect becomes
Yeah.
John the Baptist. Who knows? So this is the last thing that here it's Barclay says, this passage teaches that our discovery of Jesus Christ must be a personal discovery. Jesus' question is, what do you think of me? When Pilate asked him if he was king of the Jews, his answer was, do you ask this on your own, or did others tell you about me? And so he goes on and says that knowing about Jesus is not the same thing as knowing Jesus. So we're running out of time here. Any last comments?
I think he must have just been so relieved when Peter finally said, "You're the Messiah." I mean,
Yeah. You finally get it.
Yeah, duh.
Well, thank you for the class, Sarah, and especially for the map and everything. That is greatly appreciated.
Yes.
Yeah, thanks for class.
Okay. Thank you all for coming. See you at church.